Today's show, we're going to get into my favorite subject, which is, in fact, hidden history, revisionist history. This whole debate going on in the world right now about history and experts and all that stuff is, I couldn't think of a better time to have our next guest on. He is a author of 10 books. He is a revisionist history expert. I hope to, we get the experts on the show, and we're very excited to have him on. It is a blessing to have him here today. Please welcome author Michael Hoffman. Sir, how are you?
Thank you, Sam, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Anytime, all the time, my friend. Anytime, all the time. For those who may not be familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I studied at the State University of New York, at Oswego, and also Hobart College in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. I worked as a reporter for the Associated Press. I covered all kinds of crimes. I was on the Son of Sam case. I was on the double initial murders. And then I went into the field that I'm in now, history and politics. Noam Chomsky intervened for me, the MIT professor at the time, who was very busy, and I was deeply impressed by his intervention when I was fired from a radio station upstate New York in 1982 for broadcasting a documentary titled Zionism, Racism, and the Beirut Massacre, mostly turning on the now largely forgotten carpet bombing of downtown Beirut in the summer of 1982, culminating in a wholesale terror bombing in August. And of course, we're familiar with those sites now from Gaza since October 2023. And so from there, I moved on to working for the Institute for Historical Review. I wrote a media column for Spotlight newspaper, a national newspaper, which at one time had 400,000 subscribers. And since, for about the past 35 years, I've been an independent historian without institutional support, but I have the support of many readers who value independent history and the kind of perspectives that I've been able to offer over the years.
This must be an interesting time for you because so much of, I believe, and I could be wrong, but we'll get into it, of what you've probably been talking about for a very long time seems to be coming to the light. And the amount of pushback on it is absolutely insanity to me. And the way people, we were just having a discussion before the show about my belief is that we're in this unmasking time where people are, you see it happen over and over again on the left where they stay at a position and then they flip flop on it very quickly. This mental gymnastics they must do. And now we're seeing it with a certain subject, Zionism. It's a interesting time for you and everyone who's been working so hard to get out what is seen as alternative history, what is seen as alternative data. Real quick, before we get into everything, what is the website or where would you like people to go if they want to see any of your work?
Revisionisthistory.org is one, and my Substack column, michaelhoffman.substack.com.
All right, all those links will be in the notes to the episode, so please click on them and show Mr. Hoffman some support. Interesting times right now. I have a friend of mine, I would call him an acquaintance. We've been very nice, cordial to each other almost throughout time. And I went on this particular podcast, the Jake Shields podcast, and I was talking about how my opinion is that there should not be protected classes. If we're going to talk 9/11, we should be able to talk about anybody and everybody that we feel, even if it's a 1% involvement, that they were involved. But it seems to be like, this guy, this comedic acquaintance of mine, wants to have a conversation on the phone for I don't know what to basically set the record straight with me. I don't know what date he's going to give me, but it seems to be like this. Do you feel that what is coming out right now, we were having a discussion before this, how authentic this discussion is right now? Do you think it's authentically growing and coming to light, or do you think there's some alternatives to it?
Well, I was struck by your use of the term unmasking because I've been concerned with a study of what I call revelation of the method, and that we've reached a point in the processing of humanity where letting secrets out, which were formerly concealed and heavily guarded, is not having an enormous impact because people are fundamentally burned out by the revelation itself.
Yes.
Many
Talked
people
about
in,
that.
many people in the conspiracy theory movement, I find, are so burned out and so demoralized that they're no longer in the movement in order to seek the truth and prosecute the perpetrators, but rather to get a dopamine adrenaline rush and then go from one thrill to the next. And if you or I don't offer that next thrill, then they abandon us for whoever can offer that. But veritas and the truth is not necessarily in it. And that's been the theme of my two books on the occult, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, and most recently, Twilight Language. Especially in Twilight Language, I do talk about this baleful effect of revelation of the method. So what we need to do is we need to humanize people, to take them from the dehumanization process, which this entire alchemy, which is out there on the internet and video and so forth, and take them back into being human so that they can perceive these things. And one of the things I advocate is a fast from the internet, a fast from electronic data. Stare at the printed page for a couple of weeks. Up here in North Idaho, where I reside, it's rather easy to do that. Just take a walk out your back door, and you're in one of the national wildernesses. But nonetheless, it can be. I lived in New York, and it can be done there. So that's one point, the psychological aspect of it. And then otherwise, I'm very happy to see that my work, for example, is being exposed to the public, and I'm having a chance to disseminate it. Substack has been a big help, and of course the website. Even though I'm constantly interdicted, Google in the search engine, if you look for revisionist history, there's like 50 entries for Malcolm Gladwell, someone who I regard as an establishment shill. And then to try and find me, you'd have to be on page 12 or something like that. So there's lots of obstacles. We kicked off of YouTube, kicked off of PayPal, but that's okay. It goes with the territory. We're in a war of ideas, and this is what it entails.
This is already my favorite episode. We're
great.
5 minutes in, 6 minutes in, and I'm already. This is what I do it for.
So much truth.
How important is it to know what exactly happened? How important do you think it is to know that the history is written by the victors? History is written by people who create Babylonian money magic and have basically used that Babylonian money magic system, the fractional reserve banking, and taken it and basically, in my opinion, bribed the entire world. Like, use this phony money that these basically binary ones and zeros to basically buy everybody's belief system. And to be able to get out what is, I'm looking at the name of some of your books right here, and I find it absolutely amazing because this is stuff that we've talked a lot about on this show. And it's crazy to me that you have to go on a show called Tinfoil Hat to hear what I believe is the real history. How important is it in the scheme of things, do you believe it is to get this kind of information out? Like there's so many people out there. Like I I'm not gonna lie to you, man. I get tired, man. I get really tired constantly trying to be like, but here's information you've never heard. Here is data that's been excluded from the discussion that you are passionately having with everybody. And it's gotten to the point where I feel very much on an island. I feel very much alone. Even the people who are talking about what I am talking about, I've somewhat been, boxed into this kind of distant corner and basically left on an island. And I wondered, like I wouldn't do it any other way, but sometimes I'm like, do I just want to go out there and buy a bunch of laundromats and just disappear from the world? And I'm being dead serious. So how important is it for us to get this information out to people so that they know? Are we fighting a righteous battle, or are we just taking on windmills right now?
Well, it's a righteous battle, but there's also this psychology, this alchemy that I've been talking about. And in the Bible, it says the love of money is the root of evil. And that's certainly true. Emphasis on love. There's nothing wrong with money, which is a form of energy, but the love of it is our undoing. And in India, they have an alternate view. They say that the loss of memory is the root of evil. And I would say both of them are true.
Mm-hmm.
And the system that is opposing us, opposing our humanity and wanting to lock us down is most heavily invested in this loss of memory. So that, for example, on April 19th, this past weekend, the 250th anniversary of Lexington Concord went by, where the farmers stood up against not British troops, as conformist history says, but their own police, okay? That whether it was the British Army or a Tory militia that went after them, it was the constituted authority of the time in British America, in colonial America, that was sent to do what? To confiscate their firearms. Those two factors in that story, there's two omissions right there by not emphasizing that and teaching that to our young people. Lexington and Concord, the shot heard round the world. The first real battle of the American Revolution was fought over the confiscation of guns by the constituted authority of the time, whereas conformist history presents it as being foreign troops shipped over from Great Britain doing this. Wherever they were shipped from, they were the constituted authority, and yet American farmers stood up against them. That's a titanic moment in our history. It's the 250th anniversary. I didn't see much about it. And that's frightening to me because I think that this is being instilled in us, and we have a society which is increasingly obsessed with Hollywood celebrities and music celebrities and fashions. And even if you go on websites like the New York Post, owned by Rupert Murdoch, which is supposed to be a conservative outlet interested in the survival of the commonweal, and you find all of this gossip about who's sleeping with who and who took this drug and what murder occurred in the backyard of some Long Island wealthy person. And so there's this disorientation, and it's being exploited maximally. So it's more than ever important that we understand the past so we're not condemned to repeat it, which is another saying, I think, by George Santayana, who said that. And if we forget, and this amnesia is instilled in us, then we're just lost, because the lessons of history are very important. It's one of the reasons America arrived at where it was, the awareness of this concept of the divine right of kings, absolute monarchies, and how, for example, in the mid 17th century, the British for the first time overthrew their king, executed him. He was a tyrant. And then this was the template for the American founding fathers. Had they not remembered that and all its myriad details, we may not have had our revolution. We might have been in the same state as Canada, which is Canada is basically what America would have looked like had we not fought our revolution, which means a prescription against the proscribing of freedom of speech and freedom of press. Now, we certainly have some of that in America today, but it's controversial, and we can fight against it through various means. But in Canada, it's a principle that what the king said, what the queen said, and now, as you say, this Babylonian money system says, it's here in the United States. I wrote a book called Usury in Christendom, the mortal sin that was and now is not, on what the Bible and what Christian tradition for 1600 years up until the Renaissance taught about the renting of money, which it was considered to be a dreadful thing. You could have loans, and I explain in my book how those loans were undertaken without interest. But it's all part of this picture, and it's never more important than to teach history and to teach it correctly. And I've often felt that the teachers that inspired me were the great storytellers. They had a story to tell about Abraham Lincoln walking into a dance when he was 18 or 19 years old and upsetting all the girls there, not because his pants were too short or his arms were sticking out of his sleeves, but because they knew he was going to draw all the boys and men over to the corner of the room to listen to him tell dirty jokes.
Okay, you saved me, dude.
If you can introduce kids to an interest in Lincoln in that way, not necessarily through a lewd anecdote, although Lincoln could be pretty obscene, I think that's the way you do it. And there's other aspects of the case. The night that Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant, Abraham Lincoln was sitting on the bed of his wounded, he'd been injured in an accident, William Seward, as Secretary of State, sitting on his bed, holding his hand. He wasn't even aware that the surrender had happened, and because he'd been out touring Richmond, Virginia, and areas like that. And what was his first interest? To rush back to Seward's bedside and to console him. And only when he returned to the White House about 9 or 10 p.m. that evening did he find out that largely, although not entirely, the war between the states was over with. So it's very important to me. It's a sacred mission to teach history, to make it interesting to kids, not just numbers, dates, and figures, and then also to undertake what we're trying to do here on the program, which is to not be dissuaded from these forbidden topics by the various gatekeepers who are telling us that we're haters and when we're dreadful people for doing this, when in fact I say, who indeed are the haters? If I'm trying to explain what is the theological root of the genocide taking place in Gaza, how is that hateful? I'm trying to expose hate. So often there's an attempt to turn the tables on us, but I reject that, and I welcome debate. I've been trying to debate Ben Shapiro for years, but no takers.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how there's so many people whose brand has been to debate blue hair, purple hair, green hair college kids, and they just curb stomp these because they are kids. We've created a system in which basically a childhood goes now into your mid-20s.
At least.
I mean, have you seen pictures where they compared like a 24-year-old in 1960 versus a 20-year-old today? The 20-year-old of before looks like the parents of the 20-year-old today.
They've already had kids and done 3 years of factory work, you know.
And it gets into like, and I don't want too stray from the course, but it's like when people get all this plastic surgery done, they can't shave the years out of their eyes.
No.
You can nip and tuck till you're blue in the face. Yeah. Or look like a cat, which seems to be the end result of all this stuff.
Horrible.
But at the end of the day, it's like we see that you've lived life in your eyes and
your neck too, and your hands.
Yeah,
they
for sure.
They cannot fix hands or neck.
But they get back to it. It's just like I always say, I don't think people are getting dumber. I just think they're getting just saturated and drowned in just useless data. And this goes back to what you're talking about, the New York Times. Who's on drugs? Who's dating who? What OnlyFans is suing what celebrity today for just stupid stuff that makes no sense? And you know, like we just did an episode, and again, I don't want to get too far off it, but like the little season, like, are we in this like end of this low vibrational time when evil is celebrated? I look at, like, you know, I hate to say it, just look at comedy and who gets promoted and who doesn't. It makes me really sad. And it goes back to this kind of like thing going on right now, this demonization of Jesus with not everybody, but this section of the internet is really into that. This guy who is presented to us as love and light, but now he's not this, he's this, who the image of him that we see is not real, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on and on. And, you know, when you see Jesus walks into this market or this temple or wherever, and he kicks over a table of people doing usury and says that's evil, that says something to me. That story is never, ever challenged, that he kicked over a table. And here we are where we have this system ran out of Switzerland by the Bank of International Settlements, which controls all of these Federal Reserves, these centralized banks, and what they're doing to the world. And it's absolutely insanity to me, and how nobody when someone goes, hey man, this president, regardless of what you think of Trump for this discussion right here at this moment, let's say he's trying to do good. Hey man, I want to get rid of the IRS and possibly the Federal Reserve, and people lose their minds.
Start on a fairly radical plank. I'm in relating that I'm weary of Israeli supremacy, Sam, in Congress and in the media, and the expectation that all respectable people must submit to its hallucinatory egomania, for want of a better word. And I say that I risk being demonized or canceled just by stating that truth. We're called to worship one God in heaven and not a multiplicity of false Zionist gods on earth. Lord Jonathan Sachs, who is highly regarded as a scripture scholar, he's deceased now, was chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth of Britain. And in a disgraceful review of a book by Jonathan Rosen called The Talmud and the Internet, This esteemed chief rabbi wrote, and I quote, "Rosen loves as I do the extraordinary moment in the Talmud in which God is outvoted on a point of Jewish law and celebrates the fact that his children have defeated him. In the world of the rabbis, not only do men study the word of God, God studies the word of men," close quote. Rabbi Sachs is referring to a tractate in the Talmud Bavli, which is to say the Babylonian Talmud, Bava Metzvah 59b, in which Rabbi Yehashua contradicts God by declaring that the law is rightfully decided on earth by the rabbis and not in heaven. And the Talmud has God admit he was wrong. It puts these words into God's mouth, quote, "My sons have defeated me. My sons have defeated me." So the Talmudic mentality contradicts God himself. It will certainly not brook any restraint from international laws or courts or any pleas from humanitarian considerations. Zionism is an occult dictatorship emanating from the Torah Shebil Pech. That is to say, the counterfeit Torah founded upon the traditions of men, the oral law that Jesus condemned in Mark 7 and Matthew 15. So the Talmudic mindset posits that the fear and trepidation of privileged students ensconced in the gilded environs of Harvard and Columbia University are more worthy of congressional and media focus than the thousands of Arab children who are rotting in newly dug graves, crushed under the bombed rubble of Gaza and in the crosshairs of Israeli killers as I read these words. So I think that what we need to understand is that there is a real world result as a result of the weaponization of the Talmud by Zionism. That's one of the things that really burns in my heart about this, is I see these children being massacred and their mothers and fathers, the non-combatants, massacred, and it's just business as usual in America. You know, it's like, oh, well, we wish it wouldn't happen and so forth. It's a type of Holocaust in my view. And so what the question comes to, is there a theological basis for this? And there is, but it has to be nuanced, Sam, because we have to walk between two extremes. The extreme of Jew hate, which is ungodly and wrong, and I've seen too much of it, the misuse of some of the information that I'm providing here. But then on the opposite side, the idolization of Judaic people, which is also ungodly and destructive, especially if it turns into a kind of racial supremacism, which I think we're seeing in the Middle East, certainly a theological supremacism. So that's the basis of a great deal of my work in this way, as well as the advancement of knowledge, the pure pursuit of truth. If someone is studying critically the Catholicism or the Catholic Church,
yes,
it doesn't mean they're anti-Italian.
Yes, I agree, dude. I so agree, dude.
Yeah, and if somebody is studying Talmudism, as I do, I actually consider myself an ally of Judaic people, and I've had Judaic people help me in my research. My big textbook, Judaism Discovered, of 1,100 pages. Some of the translations I used were provided by a Karaite. And many people they think that today's Talmudists are Karaites. Karaites are the Judaic people who only adhere to the Old Testament and reject the traditions of men, which is the oral law, the Torah Shebil Pech. And they came and helped me with some of those translations. And of course, I've been friends with many Judaic scholars like Noam Chomsky and others. So the point is this is not anti-Judaic. If anything, it's helping to free Judaic people, those few, by the way, who even know what the Talmud is, because most of them, if they knew the contents of the Talmud, they would condemn it. We need to keep that factor open. But as far as dissuading Judaic people from the aura of reverence, which surrounds the Talmud and the creed of Talmudism, I think that's important not only for the survival of Arab people in Syria, Lebanon, and in Palestine, but also for the truth, the pursuit of the truth. And there's a lot going on here, and I thank you once again for this opportunity to bring it forward.
Can I ask you now, to what extent would you say the average person who lives in Israel, to what extent are they knowledgeable about the Talmud? Because these are the people that are going to have to serve in the military and in the end.
Well, it's increasing. It used to be, of course, that the Israeli state was founded by atheists and Marxist Leninists.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then as time has gone on, the demographic has worked against them because typically secular people are not having enough children to reproduce themselves, which is 2.1. In other words, every other family has 3 children, whereas the Talmudists are, and also they're what's so-called religious Zionists. You have to sort of make a distinction between the settlers who practice one type of Talmudism, the homicidal settlers who are now trying to take over the West Bank, and then the Haredi or Hasidim, as we call them in the United States, who are practicing a somewhat different form. There's also a splinter group of Hasidim who are anti-Zionist. At one time, all Orthodox Talmudists were anti-Zionists in the 19th century because there's actually laws in the Talmud about not taking up the sword against the Gentiles until the Messiah returns. But that notion was, or that theology actually, was overthrown at least by 1920 with an aptly named rabbi named Kook, K-O-O-K, who began to merge Zionism with the Talmud. And now that's largely carried the day. But most of the Israeli population is still secular. They probably have, like the population in America, possibly taken a peek at the Talmud. They probably have also heard that the Talmud represents the micromanagement of the lives of Judaic people down to the most minute particulars. And who being free of that would want to voluntarily take that bondage up? Although there are people who are doing it, especially the Chabad Lubavitch missionaries who go around trying to bring people into the Orthodox faith.
So you would say the leadership, especially the Zionist leadership, which is most of it now, is knowledgeable about the Talmud, and that motivates their actions, right? But
no, I don't think so. I think the leadership uses it as a fetish, as a totem.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
All these people, Ariel Sharon, Netanyahu, and others, they're sometimes castigated as lobster eaters, or I don't know if they actually eat pork, but lobster is also one of the condemned foods that they're not supposed to eat. In other words, the Talmudists sort of look down on them, but on the other hand, they depend on them to help to proceed with what they regard their interpretation of the Talmud as the absolute extirpation of the Palestinians, so that they can have this rule almost across the Middle East. However, now under Netanyahu, in order for him to retain power, he has had to reach out in some significant ways to some really wild, racist, right-wing Talmudists, such as Ben Giver, Itamar Ben Giver, and Bezalel Smotrich. And these are guys that are Kahanas, followers of Meir Kahana, who wrote a book called They Must Go, saying that the Arab population had to be expelled. He advocated the murder of Palestinians openly. And so this is a factor, certainly, but the Zionists rely on the Talmud, like they rely on their spurious interpretation of the Bible, the Old Testament, as a means of justifying all of this bloodshed. So naturally, they use it. But as far as whether they even know what a daf yomi is, in other words, a page of the Talmud, or they've actually sat down and read any of it, I sincerely doubt it, because the Israeli state is pretty, very largely secular left-wing society. But this is what we're facing right now, is an increase in the army, for example, because of one of the books written, Torah Hamelech, based on Maimonides. I'm sure you've heard of the medieval rabbi Maimonides, who is an authority in halakha and Judaic law. And based on his books on the laws of warfare and the laws of kings, this book was printed and published by a couple of West Bank settler rabbis called Torah Hamelech. And in there, it says that you should even kill the babies of your enemies, because they're going to grow up to oppose you eventually. And so you do have now an increasing number. I wouldn't want to try and put a figure on it. Is it 5, 10, 15% of the Israeli armed forces are oriented this way, are actually Talmudists? On the other hand, Zionism has its own racism. I mean, Zionism is a military force put into effect since 1948 there, has been always dismissive of the Arab people from a point of view, one could say almost from a modern point of view, as being backward, primitive, not equal to the Ashkenazic Judaics, who came in from Eastern Europe and Germany. And of course, there's been a divide between the Sephardic Judaics, who are the so-called Oriental or Middle Eastern natives to the actual natives to the area, and the Ashkenazi. The Ashkenazi continue to dominate in the Israeli state, but there is this cleavage. I've often said that it's the anti-Semites who keep the Israelis united, because there are so many different factions there that they would tear each other apart if it were not for this exterior menace. And of course, terrorist groups like Hamas are the worst enemy of the Palestinians. And I completely decry what happened in October to those 1,200 people. I knew about the Hannibal Directive, and I know that in some degrees, Max Blumenthal did a wonderful video.
Yeah, he's great.
On the exaggeration of the mass murder. But there's no doubt mass murder occurred, and Hamas undertook it, and they bear responsibility for that. But what should have happened is, according to just war theory, is that Israeli special forces went in there, took out the top Hamas leadership, supported by helicopter gunships and things like that, and then put them on trial for war crimes. But you don't collectively punish an entire nation of people. Here you can see the Talmudic disrespect for the Palestinians and for non-Judaic people in general, unless certain people are qualified as allies, Shabbos Goy or something like that. But there's this revulsion and contempt for the Palestinians, even on the part of Zionists who are not religious. So this has certainly led to much of the genocide. One doesn't have to be a Talmudist in order to commit these war crimes. After all, America has committed them, and most of us allegedly are not Talmudic.
So before we go even deeper, there's this whole notion from the anti-Semite movement on the internet, that why are we just focusing on Israel? Why aren't we focusing on what's happening in the Congo and parts of Africa and all these others, all these other regions where children are being murdered, villagers are being killed, and all that stuff? I have my feelings, but on why that is. But I would love to know what your take is, sir, on why do you think there's so much focus on what Israel's doing versus what's happening, let's say, in the Congo or Yemen. Yemen's now in the discussion because it involves Israel, but what are your thoughts on it?
Well, Israel is committing these murders with my tax dollars, so that makes me complicit. So that's number one. We're sending them the bombs and the armaments which make this possible. Were it not for United States support, the Israelis would not have. We're up to 50, 60,000 Palestinians killed. What section of that is combatants and what section is civilians? Certainly, the largest proportion of that are civilians, and that's been done with the United States of America. And we similar acts of genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan. We seem to be hell-bent on this neocon insistence that we make enemies of everyone in the Middle East except for the Israelis. So that's my basis. To the best of my knowledge, I'm not paying for massacres in the Congo, but I am paying for those in the Israeli state. And secondly, Sam, I would say that the Israelis and the Israeli state has held itself up as a humanitarian gold standard to the world, allegedly God's people, actuating and effectuating God's book, and a standard for all of humanity. This is the standard, this bloodshed, this mercilessness, this contempt for Palestinian and Arab life? I don't think so. So all of those things are bound to stimulate in people a reaction, and it's understandable and it's not out of proportion. Now, there is another class of people, the people I classify as Jew hate, that they have an orientation on Judaism as being the only evil. And they look on the cryptocracy as being wholly Judaic and entirely in the service of Judaism. And when I was writing my book on the Renaissance, the occult Renaissance Church of Rome, exploring the enormous change that occurred in the 16th century, actually at the Council of Florence around circa 1450, with Pletho, this mysterious Greek who brought these teachings of Neoplatonic Hermeticism to that council. And then from there, the Medici founded the Florence Academy, the Neoplatonic Academy. And from there, you saw the rise of the money power with the Medici bankers and the Strozzi as well as the Fuggers. But my point is that when I was looking at that occult suzerainty that was arising out of the Renaissance, I also saw at the same time that there was a cryptocracy that was independent of Judaism, because Judaic banking at the time, the Medici, Strozzi, and Fugger was a Catholic banking house in Germany, probably the wealthiest in the West. When they were doing that, the Rothschilds were nobody. They were rag pickers and pawnbrokers. So the notion, and a lot of this comes out of Ezra Pound, who I respect a great deal, but he begins his analysis of the usurious economy with the Bank of England in the 17th century. He has a soft spot for the Medici and Renaissance Italians in general, which I think is misplaced, but I still honor him for his courage in many other respects. But nonetheless, I saw a non-Judaic cryptocracy operating in the Renaissance with regard to this money issue, with regard to the introduction of the occult into the Catholic Church. And Judaic people played a very small role in that at that time. There is a wing of the cryptocracy that wants to conceal itself.
Yes.
Putting forth an entirely Jewish face on things.
Yes.
And that's a distraction, and it's highly misleading in my view.
God, I wish I was as smart as you, because you articulate that so wonderfully. And I flung first grade, so I could never get that across. I talk about this all the time. It's like, for me, there were large, powerful religions before Abraham, before the Abrahamic religions. What happened to those religions? Well, I think they never disappeared. They just kind of cloaked themselves in this one small group of people. And I think there's levels to this stuff, and this is just Sam speaking based on 880 episodes of this show going on 8 years. If you go, Sam, well, who's running everything? It's these very old bankers from long time ago. And, it's like, what role does Britain have? I think so. What role does the British Empire have in so much of what's going on today? And this kind of this whole idea that the British Empire, I mean, we talk about how the Roman Empire ended, but when does anyone ever talk about when the British Empire ended? It really isn't discussed. It just kind of quietly just disappeared and became a bank called the Bank of England. And you get into, we have the doctrine, which was what was the doctrine where Britain gave Israel, the Rothschilds Israel? What was it called? The Balfour Doctrine. Excuse me, the Balfour Doctrine. And to me, that's just like theater. We're presenting this to these people, and in reality, they still control it. It's not very openly known. I learned it on the show a very short time ago, that from Jay Dyer when he came on the show, that the first king of the House of Saud was a British spy, and the control of that. So when you say that they put a Jewish face on, I couldn't agree more. It's impossible for me to agree more. And when we get into like all this quote unquote Jew hate on the internet and on Twitter right now, I was hanging out with a buddy of mine over Easter, and he was just like, why is my entire timeline anti-Semitism, or the presentation of anti-Semitism? And I go, personally, that's the game plan. Like all these religions have this kind of end of days, scenario where all the Jews go back to Israel, and Jews think that will mean that the Jews will be the rulers of the humanity, and the other side thinks that the Jews are all going to go to hell, and neither of them is a good ending to this. But if you study Hitler, there's a big discussion that Hitler's whole role was to scare European Jews back to Israel, to go to Israel to fulfill prophecy. And, we've gotten into this a lot. We've had many discussions on Israel, Adolf Hitler, what his role was. The discussion of Adolf Hitler is now becoming mainstream when you couldn't discuss it before. And like who he was he authentic to that? And how I always ask people, Why didn't he Hitler go into Switzerland? If he hated the bankers so much, why didn't he roll into Switzerland? And the only answer I can get is because they had giant hills. People are like, oh, they have big mountains. You can't go into the big mountains. I go, well, if we believe they're in Antarctica, they're working with aliens or whatever occult weirdness is going on in Antarctica. Why couldn't they go into the hill? Well, nobody really wants to take a look at that. In all these, and excuse my language, sir, but all these Hitler dick riders that are out there like championing this guy like he's the greatest to ever do it. I go, how does he rise up in a country that was so on lockdown after World War I, completely and utterly in control of the international bankers? How does he rise? He doesn't rise unless they want you to rise. And there's this argument about Trump. It's like, and I've said this before, like when you get all these cases thrown at you and you pretty much beat all of them except for one where it's a civil suit, like that's kind of crazy to me. That's like really crazy to me.
You're pretty good in court. I'm surprised that that's crazy to you.
Dude, if Trump hired me to be his lawyer.
That's what I'm saying.
You're the best lawyer ever. I heard about you in traffic court. You've really crushed it. But it's just this kind of people can't come to grips with that their brainwashing isn't correct. And it's happened at almost every single level, everywhere. And, going back to the Congo discussions, like when I see the Congo has handlers on every single one of our politicians, except for Thomas Massey, right? Seems like that's why Israel is so big in the discussion, how they openly brag about deciding who gets elected in America. And I've said this before, and I do believe you are correct that there are layers, many, many layers above Jews, above Israel. But, when Israel is basically treating America the way America treats Latin America, where we openly assassinate leaders, we manipulate movements, we manipulate politics and government. What would you like to get on? Would you like to discuss usury? Would you like to get into that? Or what would you, secret societies? What would you like to get into, sir?
Well, I'd like to do, it's your program. You can tell me. I was here to discuss my book, Judaism, Strange Gods, but I am willing to expand out. For example, it's very interesting what you had to say about Hitler, because if there wasn't any Nazism, I don't believe there would have been an Israeli state. And also he got into power by arguing against taking up Gottfried Feder. The economist Gottfried Feder was one of the most distinguished enemies of usury in the 20th century. And he wrote a book called Breaking the Chains of Usury Slavery. And Hitler latched onto that because he knew the German people were hungry for that. And he made it the platform of the NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. It was actually had a left-wing tinge to it, National Socialist, opposed to banking and usury. And Gregor Strasser was a big part of that. And then when he came to power, he completely betrayed that movement. He exiled Feder. Feder died of a broken heart around 1940 or 41, having been swindled by Hitler and seen his plans go up in smoke. Other usury campaigners, like Strasser, were murdered on the night of the Long Knives under the false pretext that some of them were plotters, such as Ernst Röhm, the head of the stormtroopers, the SA. But Strasser certainly was not. Many innocent people were killed in those days as Hitler settled scores against anyone who could dissent from his betrayal and point it out. So what did he do? He suppressed the Judaic bankers, the Judaic usurer bankers in Germany, and elevated the so-called Aryan bankers. And that they had the same usury, the same enslavement of the German people in usury. But Hitler was okay with that because there is this banking element behind him. There's also this occult element because he got involved with theosophy and some of the 19th century occultism when he got out of the army and was charged with being an espionage agent for the army and various sects, various populist sects that were arising. That was ideal for a person of his oratorical skills to come into power like that, which is exactly what he did. And he was a disaster for Germany. He put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. He took not only himself down the roads of suicide, but he took his people down. No one in their right mind would attack the Soviet Union in June of 1941 across a frontier that was 1,000 miles long, where you had to supply your army. And the alibi is always, well, Hitler had evidence that Stalin was going to attack Germany. Well, Stalin would have then had to also supply his army across that 1,000 miles, whereas Hitler would have been able to respond with the most powerful army on earth at that time, the Wehrmacht, and they would have been fully supplied. That would have been a sane kind of doctrine. But Hitler, when he was on that occult kick that he was initiated to through the Thule Society, Thule, he also imbibed not only Jew hatred, but he also imbibed contempt for the Slavic people. He had contempt for Poles and Russians and other Ukrainians, other Slavs like that. And so therefore he thought they were a slave race. He would conquer them by December, send the troops out in June. This is the kind of megalomania that we're dealing with. And when people say that some of the populists, the extreme right wing in America, say they'd like to see another Hitler or something like that, what they're really saying is they would like to see a tyrant. Hitler killed those people at the Night of the Long Knives, his own supporters, people who had worked side by side with him. Gregor Strasser had organized the north of Germany and Prussia and other territories brilliantly on behalf of Hitler. And then he was killed and betrayed. Hitler didn't even do what Stalin did. Stalin had a show trial before he killed the people. Hitler had no trial. He said, I am the law. If you like a leader like that, I thought the American revolutionaries gave their lifeblood to get free of that yoke of a king who tells his subjects what to do. And every German was a subject of the Führer, Adolf Hitler. And the Germans haven't recovered from that yet. So, yes, I was taken by that. And also the fact that there are some aspects of Hitler's movement, which I'm afraid are gaining, as you suggested, gaining more and more influence and cachet. And I just don't understand it at all, except that I think there's the hand of the cryptocracy behind it. What we need is another Thomas Jefferson. That's what we need, not another Adolf Hitler.
I love what you just said there. It just cleared up so much for me. Like, he got rid of these Jewish bankers and replaced them with the Aryan bankers. That completely and utterly settles that whole argument right there. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful point that you made right there. That is absolutely amazing. Yeah, I'm blown away by that, because that really ties up a lot of loose ends. That is because when you talk to the Hitler guys, they're always like, he locked up Rothschild. You're like, yeah. And I also believe that's a sense of theater that he is trying to get the German people behind him. They are completely and utterly demoralized from World War II, which to me is this movement that is the beginning of the British Empire grabbing
World War One.
World War One, yes, excuse me. World War One grabbing Israel or Palestine. So they got to wrestle it from the Ottoman Empire. And you start with this made up high impact event, an assassination of a prince, and that kicks it off. They were looking to kick it off anyways, to wrestle it from the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman would not give it to the British Empire. They wanted that land. I personally think it has to do with trade routes. That whole area has to do with trade routes and controlling trade routes. When you talk about what happens if we go to war with Iran, well, they own rivers and seas that once they shut those down, the oil distribution is completely halted. Well, I want to own that. I want to control that. I don't want you controlling it. I want us to control it. That's money and power. If you take a look at the Ben Gurion canal that they want to put in, that's taking power away from Egypt. That is, again, controlling trade routes. And Hitler was very, 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 very big onto that. And there's a lot of discussion, and I don't know your thoughts on it, sir, but there's a lot of discussion that a lot of the people in these camps, of this Holocaust camps, regardless of what you may think of them, a lot of them were the Orthodox Jews who were against Zionism and the control of that. When you see that, like the Nazis, even before Hitler was, the head guy in charge, they were doing deals with the Zionists to get them to move to Israel. They were complicit in that. In
like money deals?
Well, the deal was that they would give them safe travel to Israel if they agreed to buy German goods. And, so that everyone's like, oh, it's business. No, dude. It's not business. It's literally fulfilling prophecy. That's what they're doing. And I love that, the whole discussion of the occult is very interesting to me, and Hitler's history. There's a lot of people have a discussion of Hitler's history, but I love everything you said right there, dude. Thomas Jefferson over Hitler all day, every day. Give me another Thomas Jefferson. I don't know if we could ever get to that right now because we're so divided. But yeah, man, that's a well. Thank you for that point. Now let's get into strange gods. Where do you want to begin?
Well, I think that what I should do is I should answer some of the few critics who dared to take me on in this. When I say dare, I don't mean any sense of braggadocio. It's just that when you have people like Ben Shapiro who claim to be masters of these texts, and yet if it was a simple case of destroying me and demolishing my thoughts, why not have me on? Maybe he doesn't even have to mention my books or my website, revisionisthistory.org. He could just say, Mr. Hoffman, I'm going to have you on, and all I'm going to do is mention your name. I would still go ahead and debate him. So what does he have to lose? But I think actually he has a great deal to lose, because one of the things the critics say is that the Talmud of Babylon and its successor texts is not authoritative halakha. It's not really law. It's just commentary in a series of debates. And you hear that quite often if you go just one level deeper into some of the horrible passages that are in the Talmud. And that's the reply. That's the first line of defense. It's actually an insult to our intelligence to put that forward, because it means that they consider the person who is they're discussing this with as what's known as an am ha'aretz, in other words, an ignorant peasant. Because and they call Judaic people who are not conversant with the Talmud by that invective. But in order to answer the question, it's necessary that I refute a familiar defense against charges that the Babylonian Talmud is the basis of the laws of Orthodox Judaism. Apologists assert that its more blatantly horrible passages don't constitute the halakha, but only commentary and debate. And the truth is very different. The oral traditions of the Pharisees, what I mentioned to you earlier, the Torah Shebil Pech, is in contradistinction from the written Torah, the Torah Shebiktab, which was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And then Rabbinic Judaism invented this legend that also on Sinai was given this oral law. And it just so happens that that law was never written down until Israel rejected its Messiah. Once Israel rejected its Messiah, then it became so corrupt that that spurious oral law was committed to writing as the Mishnah, which forms the central axis of the halakha of Orthodox Judaism. And then the Gemara, which follows from it, forms the Talmud. And so in these oral traditions, which Jesus condemned in Mark 7 and Matthew 15, we have the extra biblical superstitions, the occultism, the self-worship, racist hatred for non-Jews, and sheer nonsense. For example, in the Talmud tractate Ketubot 60b, 61a, 60b, if a woman copulates in a grain mill, she will have epileptic children. If she copulates on the ground, she will have long nets. Apologists assert that the Talmud's only a record of debates, which is known as machat, between Tanaim and Amorim. The authors of the Talmud Bavli, or Babylonian Talmud, are collectively known as Chazal. And that by focusing on one portion of the controversy and upholding that passage as authoritative, the critic errs because there's no legal sanction given to the other side of the debates in the Talmud. It's demonstrably false. The Mishnah and subsequent rabbinic amplifications of it comprise the halakha, by which every believing Orthodox person is bound down to the most minute and intimate particulars of his or her daily life. And so how Talmudic law is deduced and adjudicated is often an enigma to outsiders. And that's what they prey on with these am ha'aretz. They don't tell you that there's a Talmudic indeterminacy, which does not preclude lawmaking by majority rabbinic consensus. The Talmud is a bureaucratic book, whereas the Kabbalah, the other major sacred book in Talmud, in Orthodox Judaism, is a mystical book. And so when we look at the United States government and the parts of it that conservatives don't like, for example, one of the things they've decried is when the Supreme Court makes law. The Supreme Court isn't supposed to make law. That's the job of what? The legislature. So lawmaking by judicial process is effectively Talmudic. This is exactly how the Talmud makes law. And so what you have is then, as a public relations ploy, many Talmudists pretend otherwise, revealing the low opinion they have of the public, who they believe will swallow the line, the Talmud's just a book of debates.
Yes.
And it's not. What it is that it's a complex document. Depending on the translation in English, it's between 35 and 42 volumes. And you have hermeneutical principles on how to interpret that. Okay. And it's all tied into situation ethics. Talmudism is a religion of situation ethics. On one hand, you have, if I bring up the Zugat pairs, I might lose the audience, so I won't make reference to that. What I'll say is there are two influential schools dating from the time of Jesus, the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Hillel represents leniency, although that's relative, and Shammai represents stringencies. And these are interpretive tools used to decide how a particular portion of the Talmud, designated as halakha, is to be applied at a given time. And if people think it's like the U.S. Constitution that's supposed to be applied all the time in all of its aspects, then they're lost, because that's not the Talmudic mentality. And so there's these interpretive tools, the 13 hermeneutical principles, and many others along those lines, which really obfuscate what is the point of how to get to the heart of this, okay? And so what I would say is there are thousands of cases where these rules are brought up, rules of derivation and procedure, and this is where people are lost. There's a clear indication of how the law is decided. And it is the law. That's the thing. There's no question about it. And so once we understand that, then we can get to this situation ethics, which is going on. And this is one of the most sensitive areas. And if you think it's too sensitive for your listeners, Sam, and no. Maybe I'm being naive. Okay, it's not too much that's sensitive, but it's a very hot topic. It's the issue of child molestation in the Talmud. And I say this very carefully because any notion that even Talmudic people are involved in these things, it's not necessarily true. And I wouldn't want anybody to believe that. But what I have to say is that these things are part of the praxis, Talmudic praxis, in terms of what is derived from these texts. And it's also a clear illustration of the situation ethics. So, for example, Ketubot 11b, intercourse with a boy under 9 years old is not considered a significant sexual act. Is it okay to go here or not?
Go for it. I just before you go there, I just want to say this, is that, people can say whatever they want about like this take on the Talmud, but what I will tell you guys, and our crowd is for our listeners are very advanced. They're down for all of it, sir. So you don't have to pull any punches. But if you study what is said in the Talmud, there are literal laws in Israel that mirror that. Meaning they pass almost, whether it's on the book legislation or understood legislation, such like, we've seen this story done on CBS or ABC, whichever one it was, about how if someone is, if an Israeli or a Jew is in America is accused of some sort of sexual assault, they can get on a plane and fly to Israel. And, in my own life, I was into crypto. I had a lot of crypto. And I was able to invest, guys. I didn't spend the money. I was able to invest either through sponsors paying me in Bitcoin or whatever it was. I was able to get in on early on a lot of these cryptos to the point that it had gotten up, I would say, to what would be worth at this time $1 million. Celsius stole all my crypto. When I went to go look at that I had coins there, they were phantom coins. They weren't real coins. They just said, "Hey, you have 7 Bitcoins in our exchange." But it was gone. He had taken all of them.
You couldn't even swap nothing. They're like
were gone. They were gone. Do you know where they caught him when they arrested him? He was at the airport. Do you know where he was going? He was going to Israel. He was getting on a flight to Israel because he couldn't get extradited back to America if he got there. So I just want you guys to know that this is not picky. This is literally factual what we're discussing here. So go on, sir.
Okay, and I do want to point out that there's also a haven for molesters in Rome. It's called Vatican City, because many of the prelatical molesters here in the United States, such as Bernard Cardinal Law from Boston, and there was a movie made, and that movie was largely accurate, believe it or not, one of the few that Hollywood turns out that was accurate, about the plague of child molestations on those helpless Catholic children. And he was welcomed by Pope Saint John Paul II, given charge of a basilica, and all the honors and many other types of sanctuary was provided to him and other molesters like him. So the Israelis are not unique there entirely. But I think that what I want to point out is that when it comes to Hillel, and when it comes to, because Hillel, is considered like the alternate Jesus among both secular liberal professors at Harvard and Yale, as well as the mass media, that he was sort of like another Jesus. He didn't believe that he was the Son of God, but he was a good man who preached love and everything. Actually, Hillel is deeply implicated in what I'm going to lay out here for you. But he sought a problem in cognitive psychology, which was how to persuade a Judaic audience to convince them that to believe Hillel and the other rabbis on the basis of scripture alone. And their enactments can't be found in scriptures. And Hillel was unable to convince them of that fact. So what he did is he created this gigantic pile of legal and self-perpetuating textual arcana, which is what we're coming into here, which is employing situation ethics. So in Ketubot 11b, and I realize this is kryptonite to a lot of people, but I think it's the best illustration of situation ethics working inside of this particular dogma. Intercourse with a boy under 9 years old is not considered a significant sexual act. Now, deniers of this claim that this horrible permission for child molestation in the Talmud is not a permission, and they employ various deceptive circumlocutions to evade that fact. Concerning permission with regard to Sanhedrin 54b, where we find a barita, which is a learned exposition of the text by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who's the major translator of the Talmud into English. He says, this supports Rav, for it teaches that if a man engaged in homosexual intercourse with a child under the age of 9, he is exempt from liability. Now, I'm not taking that out of context, which is the next thing. First, that my critics will say, the Talmud is just a series of debates. It doesn't have legal authority. And then the second one is they'll say, you're taking it out of context. I'm not taking it out of context. The entire Talmud is online. It's Sefaria.org, SEFARI.org. Look it up yourself, and you'll find that this is in context. So deniers claim that the exemption applies only to the adult's liability for a specific capital punishment. So in other words, in Leviticus 20, death by stoning is the fate of those who engage in homosexual intercourse. So the term used, however, for exempt, the Hebrew word is patur, P-A-T-U-R. That denotes a general exemption from liability, not limited to capital punishment alone. The text says patur, or exempt, without qualification. So the broader phrasing leaves open the possibility that no court-imposed liability applies. So therefore, the broad exemption, not having any clear punitive consequences, can be interpreted as reducing accountability. It effectively permits the act. Also, with regard to Sanhedrin 54b, I'll state it plainly. It exempts the adult from liability for homosexual intercourse with a boy under 9, potentially including all court-enforced penalties. The leniency is obviously ethically problematic as it fails to impose adequate consequences for a grave act. The exemption creates a practical leniency that reduces court-enforced consequences. This allows the homosexual rape of the boy to go unpunished in a human court. Therefore, this is implicit permission for homosexual predation. I will debate it with anybody. Sanhedrin 54b states, I reiterate, that a boy under 9 cannot be the legal object of sodomy because his intercourse is not halakhically active, exempting the adult from liability. So, the Talmud is a book of loopholes, escape clauses. This exemption creates a practical loophole that reduces court-enforced consequences, and this does indeed constitute what I'm saying, an implicit permission for the homosexual predation of boys. Calling such discussions theoretical or a debate without evidence reflects partisan bias. This ruling stems from Hillel himself. And so that's, one point that I think it's ineradicable, and I don't see how it's debatable, even though there's something called pilpul, Pilpul, where things that can't be debated are undebatable, have been proven, and the Talmudists will nonetheless take in hand. It's a weary, tendentious way of approaching these things, but it really doesn't it doesn't hold water in front of an objective audience that hasn't been schooled in this type of intellectual dishonesty. And so, it's one of the things. It's the most inflammatory, and the thing is that it's difficult. Sam, you've given me this forum, and I appreciate it, but it's difficult to present these things to the general public because it's like kryptonite to them due to the Jew haters. So the Jew haters have made this like toxic to go into this level because they say, oh, well, inevitably, if you're saying that the holiest book of the Judaic religion teaches this, it must be, absolutely the lowest religion on earth, and the people who follow it must be not at all. I don't know how it is that it's only a minority, an extremist minority, that takes these passages and applies them to the widespread predation upon children in Orthodox Judaism. I don't think there's any question about that. It's fairly widespread. But nonetheless, if we have this Jew hate and we can't get past it because any type of scrutiny like this, based on facts, that's what I presented to you. And I believe that they can't be overturned. And therefore, if these facts have this invulnerability, why can't they be presented and taught? And if they were more openly, without all of this intellectual dishonesty, we might have Judaic people coming forward and saying, look, Michael Hoffman is correct literally in terms of the verbatim text, but let's take a wider, broader examination of how this is applied in culture. I would welcome that. But because this is damned, it's become a damned area of pursuit. And it's become so red hot that anyone who approaches it is risking debanking, deplatforming, shadow banning on Twitter and things like that. There are very few who wander into it. I mean, I basically have this field unto myself, although I find that people will raid my books, take something out of context, they don't credit me for it, and then they push it through in some other area, and you lose control over this information because it has to be within the context of a humanitarian love for Judaic people. You mentioned, Sam, saying that one of the unique things about Jesus, which warmed your heart, was him kicking over the tables of those money changers. And another aspect, which is unprecedented in other religious traditions, is when he said, love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. Bless and pray for them. And this is my way of doing that. It's done out of charity. It's done out of compassion. Both of my books, the textbook, Judaism Discovered, and the book I sent to you, Judaism Strange Gods, has an introduction for Judaic people, talking to them about the charity that I'm offering them, the compassion that I'm offering them. If they feel that I'm wrong, let's come together and let's reason together on this issue rather than putting it in front of a wall of which anyone crosses, then they're just, their financial and reputational life is over with.
Could I ask you, is it forbidden? Is that kind of abuse forbidden elsewhere in the Talmud or the Torah?
Yes, there are general. That's a very good question. There are general demands that homosexuality is outlawed. So you'll find one part of the Talmud where it will say that homosexuality is wrong. And then you come to this section that says that what I just told you. However, if you apply that gigantic heap of self-perpetuating arcana, the rules of classification, the sevenfold classification for human hermeneutical analysis of the text, right. Then there's a 33-fold one. There's a 13-fold one. This is the job of the Talmud Chacham, the scholars of the Talmud, in order to bring this out and say, well, this is what, is at work here, and this isn't. So if you look at the Talmud, like the U.S. Constitution, say it has to make sense, it can't contradict itself, you're lost. And they and the interpreters of it will themselves say that, no, this goes to show that, you're uneducated, you're ignorant, you don't realize how we emphasize these things. But for me, when you have a text like the ones that I brought out to you, Sanhedrin 54b, for example, what is to argue? It's an obvious Jeffrey Epstein kind of a manifesto for what you want to do to a little boy. And the permissible age for girls is 3 years old. So, I mean, you can see the potential for abuse here. Wow. Now, I was raised in New York. I grew up with secular Judaic kids. One of my closest mentors was a man named Levine. He was a man that introduced me to classical music, even though my own father was very much into opera and classical music, but he was too busy with his profession. But Mr. Levine did do that for me. He was a cultured gentleman. He went to a Reform Judaic synagogue. Reform Judaism arose as a reaction against the contents of the Talmud in the 19th century in what's called the Haskalah, which was led by Moses Mendelssohn. And they really wanted to look good in Western eyes. And it was sincere. I believe it was sincere. And so they delegitimated the Talmud. And at that time, I doubt Mr. Levine had ever seen a page of the Talmud. I'm sure he was aware of it because he was an intellectual. But and he lived a good life. I mean, he was living it without Christ. And, my Christian brothers and sisters will say that it's not possible. But it is possible if you understand when people, there's a theological principle of invincible ignorance. Some people have been so turned off to the Bible and Scripture and the church by the bad example of Christians. That is the number one reason why people are opposed to Christianity. Yeah. The horrible example of the TV money-grubbing evangelists, and the whole shtick, all the way down to the warmongers that Trump is now employing to push forward the bloodshed in Palestine and Yemen and so forth. So we have to understand that within this strange anomaly here, this enigma of how this can be there, and yet we dare not accuse Orthodox Judaic people of necessarily being practitioners of this. Nonetheless, I'm not going to back down from the fact that this should have been repudiated a long time ago. Christians are often called upon to repudiate the Gospel of John, that it's anti-Semitic, which is ridiculous because it was written by a Semite, but be that as it may. And we're constantly told you have to repudiate this and distance yourself from that. Well, how about distancing yourself from these passages that I've given you? That would be very welcome. I would celebrate that. And I think it would be an act of liberation for Judaic people. And this is where I'm coming from. But my enemies want to paint me in an opposite light. I gave a speech for Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam. Minister Farrakhan was kind enough to invite me to be the first white person to speak at the National Convention in Chicago, what they call Savior's Day, February of 2019. And I gave a speech there for about 7 or 8 minutes about the Talmud. And I was well received, warmly received, better received than I am among my own people. And I thank the Honorable Minister Farrakhan for his hospitality. And also I corroborate with the Historical Research Department of the nation, which is a top-notch research group. But anyway, I mention this because when I got up in front of the 4,000, also it was televised to Africa and the Caribbean, I said, assalamu alaikum, to the Muslim people. I said, braka hatzlaka to the Judaic people, wishing them blessings. And of course, I said, I stand before you as a follower of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. As I proceeded through my talk, I said that the word Jew is a holy word. None of that was repeated when the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, wrote a report about what I had to say the next day, denouncing me, of course. They took whatever could be twisted into an inflammatory interpretation. That's what they publicized. And where I said the word Jew is a holy word, and where I wish the Judaic people of the world, braka hatzlaka, that was all omitted. So this is the type of tyranny we're dealing with. But as Sam said, they're backed by the money power.
Yeah, I mean, if you just study the whole thing in Israel, it's 100%. Pick one side, arm them, finance them, and allow them to do all your dirty work, which is to clean up and just try to get the greater Israel project going. I mean, and they use the Mass Hannibal Directive, the Daya Doctrine, all that stuff. These are all well-known ideologies, plans to dominate the region. And again, I personally believe the Bank of England is higher up. You could go into whether it's the Vatican, they seem to be in play. There seems to be three areas that seem to be in play in all this, and that is the city of London, Rome, or the Vatican, and Washington D.C. all are this mechanism of this Frankenstein of control and what they're doing to that area, and they're slaughtering people, and they just don't care. And a big part of this, this witchcraft that they're pulling is to get us not to believe our eyes or our ears or the wisdom of our experiences. And I am seeing children, my children's age, being slaughtered, and I am being told that they are terrorists. I am being told that they are complicit in October 7th. And it doesn't matter how many times you can find quotes and videos of Netanyahu talking about setting up Hamas to counter the PLO. It doesn't matter to them. And it's this whole thing where it's like what was it, Mark Twain's quote, it's easier to fool somebody than to convince them they've been fooled. I mean, this is where we're at. I get constantly told old data, debunked data. I mean, there are people that are using debunked data to defend Israel when the Israeli government and media are the ones who debunked it. The people who were involved in October 7th have come out and basically said in what I believe is a revelation of the method of what they did that day. You remember the tunnels that were under hospitals? Guess who created those? Israel. It's all come out. They've openly admitted it. It's absolutely ridiculous. Ben Swan, to me, is the case close of October 7th. I mean, over and over again, told, be quiet, shut up. You had IDF soldiers going there doing something, those soldiers being told, if you bring this up again, you'll be court-martialed and thrown in jail. Where do we see that? October 7th. With these quote-unquote hijackers. The hijackers.
I saw at 9/11 too, the same thing. You had people in the government warning of this strike, and people in other
governments. That's what I meant to say, 9/11. Yeah, 9/11.
Oh, okay, that's what you meant. Yeah,
right?
totally.
Where it's like, hey, man, we got these guys. They're not learning how to land planes. Shut up. There you go.
Like who's the Jew tunnels in New York? Remember that just disappeared.
Yeah.
No one really found out what really happened. It was like, oh, just disappeared.
And it's like I have this discussion I'm going to have with somebody who's an acquaintance of mine. And it's just like, I am not picking on anybody. I am just saying there are no protected classes. Everybody should be open to scrutiny, criticism, and jokes. I'm sorry. Like, what percentage of the USS Liberty attack do we have to achieve that we believe Israel's involved for us to be able to criticize Israel? What percentage of JFK or RFK assassination do we have to achieve before we can criticize a foreign government and a foreign intelligence agency? What percentage of 9/11 do we have to achieve before we can go, hey man, we slaughtered 4 million Iraqis and they had nothing to do with it? Because the whole notion is, as you get gaslit, is that this is going to lead to goose stepping. This is going to lead to ovens. Okay. Well, it did. And it was 4 million Iraqis that had nothing to do with it. Dead. That is on Netanyahu's hand. I was saying it was George Bush. It's Netanyahu's blood. Netanyahu's blood. The Iraqis' blood is on Netanyahu's hands.
And you also mentioned the British Secret Service founding the Saudi Arabian monarchy. And one of the things that really infuriates me is how the Arab governments of the area are so apathetic toward the slaughter of the Palestinians there, led by the Saudis, and also nations like Bahrain, where there is a large naval base. Bahrain is a tiny minority of Sunni Muslims who rule over Shiites and periodically execute their clerics and other types of leaders. And Saudi Arabia has been more or less the battering ram for the Israelis against the Yemenis and against the Houthis. By the way, after the diaspora with the fall of the temple in AD 33, as well as the failure of Bar Kokhba's revolt in 135 AD, many Jews fled to Yemen, in the Yemen area. And I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a lot of Israeli genetics and DNA in those Yemeni people, because their ability to fight and their intelligence in the way they do it is truly remarkable compared to some of the other failures of the Arabs in the Middle East. But I think that if you look at Wahhabism, the heresy that arose in Islam in the late 18th century, which is inimical to Western civilization, which despises Christianity, whereas you have churches in Shiite areas that are unmolested and where people can freely worship. This isn't the case where under Wahhabi Islam, when they have a strong dominion and hold over the people. And it's been very problematic. The Bush family's interactions with the Saudis, George W. Bush putting them on a jet and sending them out of the United States when all air traffic was shut down after 9/11. There's a lot that should be understood here in making distinctions inside Islam. If we had someone from Asia or the Middle East generalizing about Christianity and imagining that Lutherans are the same as Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses are the same as Catholics, we would laugh at that. But many right-wingers in the United States make these ignorant generalizations about Muslims, as if Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, Alawite Muslims, Wahhabist Muslims, Salafist Muslims, and right down the line are all one homogenized whole, and it's simply not true. And I'm very disappointed in the fact that the Arab people, I realize they're ruled largely by dictatorships in Egypt, horrible dictator there, that some of the worst prisons in the world are in Egypt. And then the Saudis cooperating with the destruction of the Houthis. The Houthis are simply saying, whether it's right or wrong, that there's a genocide underway in the Israeli state. And we're trying to stop it by force of arms, which was a principle that was recognized during World War II. I mean, what were the partisans? The partisans took up activities that one could call borderline terrorists to fight the Nazis and to support the forces, the Allied forces. And the Yemenis may see themselves in that same way. In the same way, the Israelis have justified their mass bombardment of civilian areas in Gaza on the basis of what the Americans did during World War II to every major German city, and not only to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, but also in Tokyo in March of 1945, where 100,000 people in Tokyo were basically barbecued. And this is all on the United States, and it creates a precedent.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. You mentioned Yemen and Jews. Michael Churoff, who was like head of, I forget what his actual title was during 9/11, but it was he was basically in charge. And he's the one who sent all the dancing Israelis back to Israel, got them all out of jail, put them on a plane, flew them back. Well, you bring up Jews in Yemen. Well, there was I think the 1940s, there was an operation called Magic Carpet, and his mother was instrumental. She basically went undercover as a flight attendant, and they smuggled Jews out of Yemen into Israel. She was a part of that. His father was a Talmud scholar. And
what do you think of Alan Greenspan?
Well, anybody that's in charge of the Federal Reserve is shady to me and complicit in the enslavement of humanity.
He swore his first oath of office on a copy of the Talmud. as did Deborah
my
Lipstadt when
God.
she was sworn in by Biden as the head of the Anti-Semitism Bureau of the State Department. She swore it on a copy of the Talmud. I thought your listeners might be interested in that.
I did not know that. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
That is absolutely insane to me. That is absolutely insane to me. And it's like we said, again, they make USAID, the bad guy. But in reality, where do you think USAID is getting all their money from? The Federal Reserve. And I've been saying this forever. The Federal Reserve funds everything you hate in the world. The Federal Reserve is the one that's propping up this false reality onto God's reality. So whenever you're watching something and you go, that doesn't make any sense to me, that's what we're talking about.
So you think they're controlling what's the Mandela effect? Like in a weird kind of way?
That's not even like, who even knows what that is? That could be multiple dimensions. That could be just, if you create the internet, you could probably figure out how to manipulate the internet. But in reality, like when you're like seeing drag queens reading to kindergartners and you go, that doesn't make any sense to me. That's what we're talking about, because we get into all that stuff's funded by USAID.
Oh, okay. I get what you mean. Like the Sesame Street in Iraq. The Sesame Street in Iraq, that makes no fucking sense.
Yeah, I mean, none of it makes any sense. None of it makes any sense. BLM, I mean.
The bricks during BLM, like that makes no fucking sense.
None of it makes any sense. All of it. Everything you see on television, when you see waif models being action heroes, and you go, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Or women going to space? That?
Yeah. I mean, dude, Amazon is a wing of the government, dude. Amazon is a wing of the government. I mean, I don't care what people say. When COVID shuts everything down, right? When COVID shuts everything down and the only stores are open are Amazon Fresh. I mean, that is, to me, fascism. It's the best example of that. That is fascism right there. So everything is funded by this Babylonian money magic, fractional reserve banking. And it's like, and people don't realize, you're like, if we're trillions of dollars in debt, where's that money go? Oh, it goes to sustaining the beast system, the satanic system. Okay. It's like kind of like when you get into, Kamala Harris and like, where did all of her money go? She spent what, $20 million?
Yeah.
What is that number? That doesn't seem like a lot, $20 million. That's a scoring forward coming off the bench. That doesn't seem like a lot to me. But when you go, oh, she blew through $20 million. Where'd they all go? She paid all those people in the arena, at every arena.
That's insane.
To come and see her, to act like she's filling arenas. And she wasn't. It's a false reality being presented onto God's reality.
What's that village we talked about? We mentioned
the Patankin village.
That.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. An illusion. Sir, is there anything we didn't get into that you wanted to cover?
Well, I'm at revisionisthistory.org, and what I will close with, because it has an economic angle to it, is that, as we know, God had a plan in the Old Testament, which is still in effect in the New, to keep people out of debt peonage. And this is what we've been partly talking about today. And so the traditional halakhic reasoning views the prose bowl. That's a rabbinic enactment that modifies the application of biblical law. And let's look at that biblical law for a minute. Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 2. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. End quote. So this commandment mandates that all loans canceled in the seventh sabbatical year, preventing perpetual debt and promoting economic justice, because God did not want his people, and since Jesus came, we are all now his people, to be in debt peonage for all their lives. Okay, so what does Hillel do? He comes along and issues a nullification of God's law.
God.
And he says that you can collect on these loans after 7 years. He's transferring the loan using a legal technicality. like many of us have been oppressed by lawyers who have used that against us, a legal technicality, a loophole, to say that I'm putting this law of God under the Beth Din, under the rabbinic court. And the court can then proceed to permit loans to go beyond 7 years. And if we were really a Christian society and not just a Bible banging society out of the Talmud belt down south, advocating for the mass murder of civilians overseas, then we would have loans that ended at 7 years. And yes, it would be workable because God commanded it, and therefore his grace would make it workable. So this is a textbook example of situation ethics as Hillel enacted it, allowing creditors to collect debts that God commanded should be canceled. And I thought that your listeners might be interested in that.
I love it. I love it. That's a great question. So I see you have 2 books on you. Can you go back to his books? I'm going to buy these books. But yeah. So I see one book is $500. There's much lower price books.
No, there's no book that's there's no book that's 500. There's a
that's a case of 32 books.
I used to publish.
Oh, it's a case of 32 books. Oh, because it says the Occult Resistance Church by Hoffman. It's only a few copies remain, and I'm not judging the price.
Oh, that's a first edition.
Okay, no, that what it is we printed 3,000 copies of that book with a color insert, which I'm very proud of, on gloss paper. First one of my 10 books that had that.
I'm gonna buy it.
And but no, it's available for much less than that. I think $49.95 or something like that. But it's in black. These color pictures that you're seeing here, by the way, if you stop right there, Sam,
oh boy,
this is the Sistine Chapel. This is the holiest Catholic church in the world, in the Sistine Chapel. And the guy you see there naked with his genital organs in the mouth of the snake is the mayor of Rome, who objected to the nudity of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. And so Michelangelo painted him into the Sistine Chapel in that particular figure. And I thought Catholics might like to know about that.
That's so
But
funny.
anyway, no, it's that book. There's only like 16 copies left of the color version. And so to raise funding, it's not easy being an independent scholar.
Dude, I listen, I'm not judging, man. I'm going to buy both of them.
If you just back up at the top, and you don't have to, but anyway, up at the top, you'll see that we offer it as in black and white instead of in color. Let's see. You seem to be. Oh yeah. Okay.
Go back one page. Go back one page. Go back one page to all of his books. There we go. Yeah, they're all there. I see them. I just wanted to know because I'm going to buy them.
Renee,
I like dangerous books. I like buying dangerous books.
That's it. There it is. That's it right there. That should be it. If you go down.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's $49.95 or something like that.
Perfect.
I'm not sure. We have a lady in our shipping room that handles all
We
this.
are not judging here. I'm going to buy your books. I love buying books. I have all these books. You got a question, John?
Yeah, I just whenever we have someone, another ink-stained wretch, or at least a former ink-stained wretch like myself, I like to ask about the future of journalism, especially print. I understand you spent a long time with AP, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think there is any future in it? I mean, they're dealing with limited resources. It's all dedicated to online now. And more than ever, it's crime report, entertainment stuff, because those are what drives clicks on the website. Circulation is, it's the last thing they talk about now in the business meetings. It's all just about online. I'm curious, what do you think, if you were someone now, especially like we have a lot of young people that listen to the show, coming out of college, and you had an interest in journalism, how would you pursue it? Would you set up your own shop? Because I always thought there was a value, especially in journalism, to the apprenticeship model, where you learn at the feet of someone, a veteran reporter and then an editor, that you looked up to. But it really, the opportunities for that are so few now, especially if you want to pursue investigative journalism. I'm curious if you have an opinion on that.
I think that journalism is alive and well online, on X, on Sam's show, on other programs. But you started out talking about printing, right? The printed newspaper. And I think that's a large topic, but I think that it always is superior, like receiving a letter by first-class mail and having that tactile substance right in your hand where you can't really ignore it. Yes, you can throw it in the junk mail pile, but if it's first class, it may not be junk pile. If it's handwritten, it may not.
Right.
And you're looking at it and you're sort of confronted by it. Whereas email, it's easy to ignore. And when I was reading the New York Times as a New Yorker in its paper form, I could get the entire paper, every corner of it, look it over with ease. I think that that's something having to do with what John Stilgoe talked about in terms of reflected light and directed light. When we're reading, the light is not directly in our eyes. It's coming usually from behind our head or above our heads.
Yeah.
And that's much easier for our mentation and cognition rather than staring into a screen where the light is flowing towards us. Most of the movie theaters, as you know, in the old days, the light was reflected over our shoulders. So there was sort of an organic aspect to that. So I unfortunately only read the New York Times now in digital format because they've concluded their distribution of the Times in North Idaho, but I much prefer the printed edition. I think that we get more out of it. Having said that, I work with texts, both printed. I have an extensive library, more than 3,000 volumes of printed books, but I'm also using Kindle because I have to scramble to get this information. I hate to say that I'm rushed with all these labor-saving devices. I used to live among the Amish, and they didn't have any labor-saving devices, and they had all the time in the world. We've got all of them. We have no time. It's God's revenge on modern technology, I guess. But no, absolutely read books. And if you want to be a great writer, read the great writers, Charles Dickens and people, Mark Twain, people of that caliber. There's no substitute for that. And to have the book in your hand, I think, is a much more fruitful, holistic experience to have it on screen. But either way, let us expand our minds short of this entire videodrome psychedelic world that they're pushing on us. Let's learn to read, first of all. I mean, I really wonder to what degree is the young population semi-literate, which is another issue.
Yeah, it's a big issue. They've spread parents so thin right now. It is so hard. And then, there's just so much going in on that. So,
well, and think about the generation that's going to come up with AI, where they can. I mean, every answer is at your fingertips, and you'll have it read aloud to you. I mean, I'm ashamed to admit, my interaction with AI now is mostly over voice. I talk to it, talks to me, while I'm doing other things.
I saw my nephew's penmanship the other day, which is not cursive, horrible.
No, cursive's done.
No, we're penmanship. It was normal.
I'm going to put out ninjas. I don't care. Mr. Hoffman. It was an honor to have you on the show. You have an open door anytime you want.
Truly.
I'm going to talk to a couple people in the space to see if they can bring you on their show. If you don't mind, I would love to do that for you. And
thank you very much. And I also want to say I'm hopeful listening to the three of you, because your show is supposed to be a radical way out kind of program. And here the three of you are advocating for cursive handwriting, printed books, and it looks to me like there's hope for the future.
Well, brother, I appreciate that's a nice thing anyone ever said to me. And we look forward to having you on again, and we will talk to you soon.